VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
We do thank you for joining us on Crosstalk here on VCY America. Ladies and gentlemen, it was January 20th, 2025, that President Donald Trump began his second term as the 47th President of the United States. He won both the popular vote and the electoral vote, leaving no doubt regarding his election. The American people decided this change was necessary for what many believe to be the preservation of our nation. But in the weeks and now months that have followed, his administration has experienced an unprecedented 132 legal challenges by liberal judges. Some have referred to this as a judicial January 6th. Others have referred to this as a judicial coup. I've also seen the words judicial insurrection. In an interview that aired on PBS March 21st, the Senate Minority Leader explained their strategy. Chuck Schumer, he said, quote, "We did put 235 judges, progressive judges, judges not under the control of Trump, last year on the bench, and they are ruling against Trump time after time after time." Question: is this the way the U.S. Constitution was designed to work? Is judicial activism consistent with constitutional principles? Whatever happened to the separation of powers? Joining us today, we welcome back William J. Federer, a nationally known speaker, historian, author, and president of Amerisearch. He is speaker on the American Minute daily broadcast, authored numerous books, including America's God and Country Encyclopedia of Quotations, Who is the King in America?, Socialism, the Real History from Plato to Present, and How the Deep State Capitalizes on Crises to Consolidate Control, and also Silence Equals Consent, the Sin of Omission. Bill, thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
Jim, great to be with you.
So, Bill, judicial activism is on full display in ways that we've never seen before as a new president has taken office. And I'd like you to respond to this question. Is this the way the Constitution was intended to work?
Well, absolutely not. It's clear that the Constitution has 7 articles. The first sets out the purpose of Congress, and that's to make laws in accordance with the will of the people. The second article authorizes the president, the executive branch, to carry out or execute the laws that were passed by Congress. And the third article defines the role of the judiciary, which is to make sure the laws are carried out as Congress intended. But then in 1801, you have John Marshall. He became the 4th Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, served 34 years, helped write 1,000 decisions. And although his decisions are generally regarded as good, they did increase the power of the judiciary through John Marshall's concept of judicial review. Like, okay, we're not just going to make sure, we're going to be the final say. And so opposing John Marshall's increased power of the judiciary are groups that historians call anti-federalists. They wanted to reserve more power to the states. These anti-federalists include Patrick Henry, Samuel Adams, George Mason, and Thomas Jefferson. So Jefferson wrote to William Jarvis, September 28, 1820. Jefferson said, "You seem to consider the judges as the ultimate arbiters or deciders of all constitutional questions, a very dangerous doctrine indeed, and one that would place us under the despotism of an oligarchy." Jefferson adds, "Our judges are honest as other men, and not more so. And their power is the more dangerous as they are in office for life and not responsible as other functionaries are to elective control. The Constitution has erected no such single tribunal, knowing that to whatever hands confided with the corruptions of time and party, its members would become despots." And of course, the definition of a despot is someone with absolute and arbitrary power. Absolute means the moment they say it, it's the law, and arbitrary is you don't know what they're going to say next because they're not following the Constitution. And so this is what Jefferson, as one of the anti-federalists, was against. And there's another quote to Abigail Adams. If you want, I can share that.
Sure, go ahead.
So this one is September 11th, 1804, and Jefferson writes, "Nothing in the Constitution has given them, the judges, the right to decide for the executive more than for the executive to decide for them. The opinion which gives to judges the right to decide what laws are constitutional, not only for themselves in their own sphere of action, but for the legislature and the executive, would make the judiciary a despotic branch."
Wow. And that's, Bill, that's kind of what we're seeing here. And he was not the only one warning about this. Didn't James Madison also warn?
Right. So October 15th, 1788, and Madison says, "As the courts are generally the last in making the decision, it results to them, by refusing or not refusing to execute a law, to stamp it with its final character. This makes the judiciary department paramount, in fact, to the legislature, which was never intended and can never be proper." So he's talking about what they're doing. He's like, well, but wait a second, this is not what we intended. Madison was there when they wrote the Constitution. He should know what they intended. And he says, this isn't what they intended. This can never be proper, that you have the judiciary with so much power.
You know, this is amazing, and the warnings that are going out from these men regarding this raw power. The judiciary was not designed to have this, and I understand also, was it Baron Montesquieu that also was a framer of the Constitution, warning about this as well?
Right. So Montesquieu was a French political writer, and he was the most quoted writer by the framers of the Constitution. The most quoted is, of course, the Bible. But Montesquieu wrote The Spirit of the Laws in 1748, and he examined these three branches of government. He's sort of the one credited with coming up with the idea of three branches. And Montesquieu said, "Nor is there liberty if the power of judging is not separated from legislative power and from executive power. If it were joined to legislative power, the power over life and liberty of the citizens would be arbitrary, for the judge would be the legislator. If it were joined to the executive power, the judge would have the force of an oppressor. All would be lost if the same body of men exercise these three powers." So here you have the guys that wrote the Constitution are quoting from Montesquieu, and he's like, no, you do not want the judiciary to have that much power.
And yet we are seeing that assumption happen even before our very eyes. Bill, there were other warnings as well.
Right. Alexis de Tocqueville traveled America in the 1830s, wrote a very famous book called Democracy in America, and he examined our Constitution. And he concludes, the president, who exercises a limited power, may err without causing great mischief to the state. Congress may decide amiss without destroying the Union, because the electoral body in which Congress originates may cause it to retract its decisions by changing its members. But if the Supreme Court is ever comprised or composed of imprudent men or bad citizens, the Union may be plunged into anarchy or civil war. So here you have 1835. He's saying, hey, if you get a Supreme Court that wants to push its will on the country, and it's not the will of the people, then the people are going to have a war. And, of course, that's exactly what happened. The Chief Justice Roger Taney, appointed by Democrat President Andrew Jackson, Taney issued the infamous Dred Scott decision of 1857, which said that slaves were not citizens but property. So here, Taney's like, okay, we'll settle this slavery issue once and for all, their property. And he didn't settle it. He caused a civil war. Lincoln, in his first inaugural address, right, he's swearing in March 4th, 1861, and Lincoln addresses Taney. He says, I do not forget the position assumed by some that constitutional questions are to be decided by the Supreme Court. The candid citizen must confess that if the policy of the government upon vital questions affecting the whole people is to be irrevocably fixed by the decisions of the Supreme Court the instant they are made, the people will have ceased to be their own rulers, having to that extent practically resigned their government into the hands of the eminent tribunal.
And Bill, and I'm just hearing echoes of previous interviews that we have done on we the people, and the people are our king here across our land, and here they have warnings regarding that judiciary becoming, in essence, the king.
Right. The King of England, the judges were all in his pocket. One of the big fights during the pre-revolution times was who pays the judges. You think, oh, big deal, let the king pay it. It'll be one less thing for us to pay for it. No, they made a big deal over it because they knew loyalty went with the paycheck. And so the King of England said, I am going to be the one paying these judges. And the judges, sure enough, they made decisions favoring the king and being against the patriots in America.
Wow.
But Jefferson warned in 1821 to Mr. Hammond, he said the germ or the seed of the dissolution of our federal government is in the federal judiciary, an irresponsible body working like gravity, by night, by day, gaining a little today and a little tomorrow, and advancing its noiseless step like a thief over the field of jurisdiction until all shall be usurped from the states.
Bill, that's 200 years ago.
Decision here or there.
Yeah, that's 200 years ago. He's given this warning.
Yeah, and sure enough, the Supreme Court, we'll take a little more power here, we'll decide a little bit there, and before you know it, the people have given up their freedom. There was a Supreme Court justice, William Johnson, and 3 years before Jefferson dies, he writes to this Supreme Court Justice William Johnson, June 12, 1823. He said, on every question of construction, carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted. Recollect the spirit manifested in the debates. And instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, conform to the probable one in which it was passed. But the Chief Justice says there must be an ultimate arbiter somewhere. True, there must. The ultimate arbiter is the people.
Yeah.
And you look at this line, he says, squeeze out of the text. Even Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptists, where he sided with the Baptists that the state should not outlaw churches and take control of churches. And so Jefferson quotes from the Baptist Roger Williams, again, keeping the government out of the church, and Jefferson uses the phrase separation of church and state. Well, squeezed out of the text, they changed the definition of the word church to mean any reference to God. And so now they're saying, well, you can't mention God in state. But here's Jefferson himself mentions the Creator in the Declaration.
Right.
So they used Jefferson's word to outlaw what Jefferson believed.
And friends, that's what they're doing today. That's what's happening so often in the judiciary, where they are squeezing out of the text, or, as he also warned, invented against it. So much invention coming out of the text. We'll be back in 1 minute. William J. Federer, our guest. You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist and creation researcher with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, what can you tell me about Neanderthal man?
Chris, from a biblical perspective, Neanderthal man was a human just like me or you. They evidently were an ethnic group that migrated away from Babel, living in very harsh conditions, but were human nonetheless. Archaeological discoveries have shown that they used agriculture, they buried their dead, they had art, musical instruments, they were humans just like me and you. Those who assigned them to subhuman categories suggested that they didn't have the right kind of hands to use tools. But a recent study has shown that they had thumb and forefingers just like ours with just as much dexterity. In every sense, they were as human as you and me, descendants of Noah, souls for whom Christ died. Going back to Genesis makes all the data fit so well.
Thanks, Dr. Morris. For more on creation, visit our website at www.icr.org.
You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY American Network. Our topic today, the critical need to rein in judicial activism. With us is William J. Federer. He's a nationally known speaker, historian, and author, president of Amerisearch Incorporated. And friends, we're looking back, and we're not only going to talk about what's founders have stated here, but how can we limit activist judges? Can we do that? Who has the authority to do that? And we're delving through this information right now, but the warnings that Bill has been giving us here from these documents, 200 years old, warning about judicial activism in our country, squeezing out of the text, inventing against it. And friends, that's exactly what we are seeing take place today. Now, Bill, I understand that not only were these men that you've already brought up, but even George Washington in his farewell address gave warning as well.
Right. So Washington sort of saw the writing on the wall. And again, they experienced a king who had all the power. And so the Constitution is an attempt to take the power of the king and break it into three different branches and pit it against itself. So the executive branch would try to take power from the legislative and judicial. And the legislative branch tries to take power from the executive and judicial. And the judicial branch tries to take power from the executive and legislative. It's a three-way tug-of-war. And you see this pulling. Well, Washington was warning that if one side gets too much power and starts pulling away from the other, this thing's going to collapse. So in his farewell address, September 19th, 1796, Washington said, if, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way that in which the Constitution designates. But let there be no change by usurpation. For though in one instance this may be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed.
Yep.
What's he talking about? He's talking about there's a temporary good. So you're like, okay, there's this problem. I'm going to seize a little extra power that I'm not supposed to have, but I'm going to do something good with it. But he says, even though this is an instrument of good, this is the way you destroy free governments. And you get some, Caesar in there. Rome was a republic for 500 years, but Caesar gets in and he wants to do building projects and he wants to get things done. Yeah. And but in the process, he concentrated power, made himself a dictator for life.
Yeah.
So Washington is saying, don't let power get usurped.
COVID mandates
by the courts.
COVID mandates, shut down the churches, only keep open essential businesses. I mean, that's all part of it.
Yeah, and Washington said if there's supposed to be a change, let it be through an amendment. Well, you pass an amendment with 2/3 of the House and Senate, and then 3/4 of the states to ratify it. That means a super majority. So if the people want to change it, they can do it, but we want to make sure it preserves the majority will of the people. They don't want one judge deciding that he's going to change the definition of a word and broaden it to mean something the founders didn't intend.
Bill, it was not only these, but I know a friend of yours, one who was interviewed often on Crosstalk as well, Phyllis Schlafly. She had a book she put out, Judicial Tyranny, and again, she warned on this whole aspect as well.
Yeah, we miss Phyllis. Matter of fact, Donald Trump went to her funeral because she took heat when she endorsed him before all the other candidates.
Right.
Anyway, Phyllis Schlafly wrote, 20th century judges developed the notion that when they put on black robes, they became wiser than the rest of us and can reign supreme over all other branches of government. These supremacist judges developed the theory that our Constitution is a living and evolving document that they have the authority to interpret it any way they choose. The idea that whatever some judge says is, quote, the law of the land, unquote, began during the regime of Chief Justice Earl Warren. Since Earl Warren's erroneous pronouncement, a couple of generations of law students have been taught this heresy. Liberals promote this theory very enthusiastically because it rationalizes the way activist judges impose policies on the American people that our elected representatives will not vote for.
Yeah.
The supremacist judiciary is the liberals' way to bypass self-government. In other words, they use the term Democratic Party, but it's totally undemocratic because it's not representing the will of the people. The will of the people overwhelmingly put Trump in. Why? They want border security. They want safer. They want to get these criminals that have come across the border that are raping and killing. They want them out. But here you have these supremacist judges saying, we're going to bypass this democratic self-government and we're going to impose our will.
You know, Bill, what's interesting is Bernie Sanders is traveling around the country and warning about a oligarchy and warning about that. But aren't we seeing what some are calling a judicial oligarchy?
Yeah, it's called projection. So they blame us for what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that want to have this oligarchy of judges. Trump is dismantling things. You can't call somebody a dictator when they're giving up power.
Mm-hmm.
If he were taking power and taking money, but he's wanting to give back money and give back power to the people and get rid of these, the FEMA should be called the red tape department. When Katrina happened, that hurricane in New Orleans, and people on their little boats were rescuing their neighbors, FEMA comes in and stops them. And then they just take their good old time getting stuff done. It's like, wait a second.
Yep.
These centralized bureaucracies are hurtful. Phyllis Schlafly continued her explanation. She said the founding fathers did not write a constitution that set up a judicial oligarchy. They gave us a government based on separation of powers.
Mm-hmm.
The mighty power of government was divided among three branches of government. Nothing in the U.S. Constitution justifies judicial supremacy. So it's like, wait a second. And then you have lots of examples through history of presidents in Congress saying, okay, Judge, we're going to ignore you. And I think we need to remind ourselves of some of these precedents.
I think so too, Bill, because are we not seeing the courts, the ones in black robes, in essence, but also pushing back against executive decisions? I mean, so you say that there's precedent, or she had said there's precedent for presidents pushing back against judicial overreach, but we are seeing that branch of government that's been pushing back on the legislative system and pushing back against the executive office as well.
Yeah, so Trump is not a globalist. He's not a one-world government guy.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to make America great again. And there are people that are globalists, and they have money, George Soros, and they buy politics. They rent mobs. So all these anti-Tesla resistance things, these are paid rioters. They actually did a psychological study, and they found out that most of these rioters are trans people, trans women, guys that I guess think they're girls, but they're the main demographic of people that are trashing Tesla. But the precedent for pushing back against judges. Justin Evans Smith wrote for the Federalist, March 21st, 2025. He said there is a precedent for presidents pushing back against judicial overreach. Abraham Lincoln ignored a Supreme Court ruling in 1861 when Chief Justice Roger Taney attempted to block his suspension of habeas corpus during the Civil War. What was that? Well, there was a Democrat named John Merriman in Maryland organizing riots. And these riots were trashing federal buildings, destroying telegraph lines. I know it's hard for us to imagine Democrats organizing riots that trash things. Anyway, this John Merriman guy, because he was a Democrat attacking these federal buildings, the local Democrat police and court system would not arrest him. And Lincoln said, wait, this guy's a threat, and if you're not going to locally arrest him, I'm going to have an executive order to arrest him. And they tried to push back with the habeas corpus, and Lincoln ignored that and said, I'm going to arrest him anyway. So here Roger Taney was saying, no, you can't do that. And Lincoln said, I'm going to do it anyway. Another is Andrew Jackson. And this is the Worcester versus Georgia decision. And John Marshall made the decision. And Andrew Jackson just thumbs his nose at it and said, I'm going to do whatever I want. So here, this article by Justin Evans Smith said the executive branch is not bound by a lower court's political ruling, especially when it directly interferes with a lawful executive function. The real threat to democracy is a judiciary that believes it alone has the right to decide what the law is.
Wow. Exhibit A, what's happening right now in 2025.
Yeah, and even George W. Bush, March 3rd, 2004, said, "We will not stand for judges who undermine democracy by legislating from the bench and try to remake the culture of America by court order." So what's the remedy? Well, if we look at Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution, which defines the role of the judiciary, right? 3 articles, the first 3. First one is Congress, second one is President, third one is judiciary. So this third article says, judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain. So the only court set up by the Constitution is the Supreme Court. All the other courts, Congress created. And if they create it, they can uncreate it. It goes on, Article 3, Section 2. In all of their cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have the appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. So Congress can make exceptions to the laws. They can decide that we're not going to enforce certain things. And so that's what happened. Phyllis Schlafly
and Bill, so again, just to reiterate what you're saying here, it's only the Supreme Court then that's created by the Constitution, and all of the others, that was Congress, their jurisdiction?
Yeah, I mean, they could decide we're going to create 100 more federal courts if they wanted to, and we'll fund them. Or they could say we're going to get rid of all the federal courts and just have the Supreme Court.
Yeah,
they could do that. And Phyllis Schlafly comments on that exact thing. She said, the Founding Fathers, in their wisdom, gave us a solution to the dilemma. All federal courts, other than the Supreme Court, were created by Congress, not by the Constitution. Whatever Congress creates, it can uncreate or regulate. She goes on, Congress can decide what sort of cases the federal court can hear or not hear. Article 3 of the Constitution gives Congress the power to define the jurisdiction of the federal courts. And she goes on, there's a long record of Congress limiting or withdrawing the jurisdiction of federal courts over specific subjects. And this has been used dozens of times. So several years ago, there was
let me just have a pause right there because we're up against a break. We're talking with Bill Federer today. And the critical need to rein in judicial activism. Folks, were you aware that only the Constitution sets up the Supreme Court? All these other federal courts appointed by Congress and set up by Congress and funded by Congress in that regard? We're going to find out more information right after the break and where we go from here. We'll be back in just 1 minute on Crosstalk on the VCY American Network.
If America is a secular nation, why are there so many spiritual themes in the monuments of our nation's capital? VCY invites you to see Stories in Stones.
Hi, I'm Tim Schmig, and this is Stories in Stones, highlighting the men and the manuscripts and the monuments of our national Judeo-Christian heritage. We're going to be looking at a couple of the sites that are often overlooked, but are really important to us as far as showing us the godly heritage that we have as a nation.
Join Dr. Tim Schmig to explore the fascinating stories behind historic monuments and gravestones in Stories in Stones. You'll discover the secrets they hold and learn about the past etched in stone. Stories in Stones contains a Blu-ray, a DVD, and a digital download all together for a donation of just $15. Call VCY America, 1-800-729-9829.
Friends, we are seeing judicial activism on full display across this nation, and there is a critical need to rein this in. Bill Federer is with us here today, and we're looking back, statements from the founders, but also statements from the Constitution itself as it relates to this matter. Three separate equal branches of government, and we see collision taking place. Bill has given us many examples already. He's told us what the articles in the U.S. Constitution say on these matters. And Bill, just as we were going into that break, you brought up the name of Senator Tom Daschle. We remember him from South Dakota, but go ahead and pick up where you left off there.
Right. So Congress, there was a law that was an environmentalist law that said you cannot clean out brush under forests. You have all these overgrowth, and the environmentalists just wanted to leave it alone, let it grow, and so forth. Well, people that do forest management know that you have to clear out that dry, dead stuff, because if there's a fire, it'll spread real quick, and the whole forest will burn down. And so it's called brush clearing. And so they have this environmental law, and it forbade people from doing brush clearing. Well, Senator Tom Daschle got it pushed through Congress to take jurisdiction away from the federal courts over brush clearing. So people could clear the brush out, and they would be violating this environmental law, but no courts could hear any cases on the subject. So it basically took the teeth out of the law and made it invalid. And so he made this argument. It's called limiting federal court jurisdiction to, and another was the case of Jim Sensenbrenner. I think he was a congressman there in Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, yep.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
And so it's called the Real ID bill, but there was the pushing of getting a wall built on the southern border near San Diego. Mm-hmm. And environmentalists would say, wait a second, you're going to be breaking this environmental law because, little animals that want to go from the one side of the border to the other won't be able to with this fence. And so Jim Sensenbrenner passed this bill through the House, which took jurisdiction away from federal courts to hear environmentalist challenges to the completion of this border fence. So they could build the fence and be, quote unquote, violating this environmentalist law, but no judge could hear a case to try to find anybody guilty because Congress took that authority away from the judges. And so this is a power that Congress has that, to be honest, they may have forgotten a little bit about.
Right.
And we need to remind them. Number one is having programs like this, and I thank you so much for it. But everybody in the listening audience needs to call their congressman and say, you have jurisdiction over the federal courts, over every federal, except the Supreme Court, but you have jurisdiction over every other federal court, and limit them. Tell them that they cannot they cannot hear a case that deals with taking violent illegals that are killing and raping and keeping them in America. If there's any case that has to do with taking criminals out of the country, justices, you can't even hear that case. Another is if there's corruption, like paying 7 million people who have been dead Social Security checks every month. And DOJ found this out. And it's like, okay, federal judges, you can't hear any case challenging corruption in the government that we're trying to root out with DOJ. So the Congress, people need to call their congressman and say, you rein in these federal courts and these activist judges, these 235 judges that Chuck Schumer pushed through in December when a lot of senators, unfortunately, were not there. It's like, they were so happy that they won the election that they're like, oh, we're not going to, it's like, no. And so enough Republican senators skipped out and Schumer got all these judges pushed in. Well, if we missed it there, let's make up for it by having the House and the Senate pass laws limiting the jurisdiction of these federal judges.
Mm-hmm.
And
and
then there's even a quote from Chief Justice Rehnquist that confirms that they have the authority. And it was 2004. Phyllis Schlafly includes this quote in her book. She says, Chief Justice William Rehnquist included in his annual report one significant sentence. And this is the sentence. There were several bills introduced in the last Congress that would limit the jurisdiction of the federal courts to decide constitutional challenges to certain kinds of government action. So he's like, you introduced bills last Congress, and they could have limited the federal courts. And he goes on, Schlafly goes on, Rehnquist's report implicitly confirms Congress has the Article III power to limit jurisdiction on constitutional issues and to take away from the federal courts the power to continue to do the sort of damage that they have been doing for the past several decades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's and Bill, even in more current news, I mean, within the past few days, there have been more that have coming out and speaking out in regard to this matter of really Congress reining in the judiciary and the activism that's going on, removing more from them. And before you continue on, friends, again, as Bill said, you can contact your members of Congress and just say, hey, you are the one that has jurisdiction over the federal courts. You can reach out to your legislators, House.gov and Senate.gov, the number 202-224-3121 and 202-225-3121. And I know others are also chiming in, so share with us some more contemporary quotes on this issue.
Yeah, and by the way, I actually helped publish the book Judicial Tyranny that I've quoted Phyllis Schlafly out of. But several of my books, one on socialism, one on Rise of the Tyrant, they all touch on this issue in case anybody wanted to get those. But you have Alan Dershowitz. He's a law professor that you've probably seen on TV. And so he even asserted that Congress has the power to reshape the judiciary by adjusting the number and the jurisdiction of the district courts. So here's Alan Dershowitz saying it, and even Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. So the Gateway Pundit published an article March 20th, 2025, and it stated, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has suggested that Congress could strip federal courts of jurisdiction. Quote, Congress has the authority to strip jurisdiction of the federal courts to decide these cases in the first place. The sabotaging of President Trump's agenda by resistant judges was predictable. Why no jurisdiction stripping bills teed up at the onset of this Congress? So he's like, he used to be a congressman before he became governor. He's like, look, you should have known that they were going to do this. Why didn't you have these bills all ready to go? Mm-hmm. Now, they were going through the choosing who was going to be the speaker, but now that we know it, they need to buckle down and get this done. And I think Mike Johnson's doing a great job, and I think he's going to go ahead and probably get some of this action that we've been talked about going. But he does need people to call their congressman, because a lot of times people in leadership, if they have lots of people expressing a view, it gives them more authority, so to speak, more momentum to get something done. Rather, if they're the lone one calling for it, the media can try to slam them. But I love this quote that Phyllis Schlafly concludes her chapter with. She says, the role that judges play in our system of government should be like that of baseball umpires. But umpires are not permitted to change the rules of the game. Mm-hmm. The fans would not tolerate an umpire calling a batter out after 2 strikes.
Right.
I mean, could you imagine you're watching the game, and strike one, strike two, you're out. It's like, well, wait a second. You just can't, just because you're an umpire means that you can't change the rule. Just because you're a judge, you can't change. You're supposed to make sure that they're enforced the way that the Congress wants it enforced, not your will. And even one of my favorite Supreme Court justices is Clarence Thomas, and during his confirmation hearing, October 15th, 1991, and of course they're hammering away on him, and they asked him about judicial activism. And Justice Thomas replied, "The role of a judge is a limited one. It is to interpret the Constitution where called upon, but at no point to impose his or her will or opinion in that process." You're not supposed to say, okay, I'm got a political agenda, I don't like the president's agenda, and I'm going to try to twist some words and twist some meanings of things to limit the president. You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah. Well, friends, let me give a couple pieces of information here. One of the books Bill referenced is Socialism. We do have that available here at Crosstalk. Our way of saying thank you for your gift of $20 or more. Bill also has a book, as he mentioned, on judicial, what's a full name of
Tyranny.
Judicial tyranny. And friends, right now you can even go to AmericanMinute.com and secure that book, AmericanMinute.com, other resources that are there as well. If you'd like to get on the phone with Bill on this issue today, our phone number here to Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. So, Bill, you talked about Congress can put a stop to this, to judges who have gone rogue, can remove their authority over certain issues. Does President Trump also have options over judicial overreach?
Yes. Matter of fact, Pam Bondi just decided to use a state secret provision that the same thing they do when they take a document and they redact stuff. It's like, okay, they're supposed to release documents, but they can say, okay, we're not going to release this. So this Judge Jeb Boasberg was wanting all the details of the flights of sending these criminals out of America. And Pam Bondi said, no, state secret, we're not going to turn over that data to you. Right? You're just wanting to find some little minutia and try to get off the big picture, which is you're trying to limit the president's agenda.
Yeah, wow. And then also, Bill, here before the break, we were just over 30 seconds. Does the judiciary itself, namely that of the U.S. Supreme Court, are they able to take action? Is it time for them to put their judicial house in order as far as the lower courts?
Yeah, they definitely can. They can either hear a case or refuse to hear a case. They can decide that there's an overreach of the lower courts. And then I think we need to put a little, light on some of the behavior of some of these, like John Roberts. There's articles coming up that he belonged to some club where they sort of hobnob with people that are on the left. And is that the way it's supposed to be? Are they being unduly influenced and not being objective? Wow.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and I see some of the lines lighting up here, all of them lighting up, as a matter of fact, at 800-733-9829. William J. Federer, our guest. We'll be back in 1 minute here on Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewreport.com. Where did the word Zion come from, as in Zionist or Zion when we talk about Israel, Mount Zion? Well, originally Zion referred to a specific geographical location. It was a Jebusite fortress that was captured by King David. It became known then as the City of David. You can read about that in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 7. But over the time period of many, many years, it became known as encompassing many things: the Temple Mount, Jerusalem, and really, in a broader sense, the entire nation of Israel. In fact, did you know that the word Zion is used in the Bible more than 150 times. So, if you ever wondered where the word Zion or Mount Zion or Zionism comes from, or a Christian Zionist, now you know. I'm Brennan House for the Worldview Report.
This is Crosstalk on VCY America. Our topic today, the critical need to rein in judicial activism. William J. Federer is our guest. And friends, again, we do have that book on socialism through VCY. You can go to AmericanMinute.com for all of Bill's resources as well. Many great books there. And also stay tuned to his day-by-day online comments on events from history and lessons learned as well. Let's go to the phone line, which are packed. Mark in Monroe, Wisconsin, you're on the air.
Yeah, in my opinion, Chuck Schumer was completely ignored by the judicial system when he blatantly threatened the Supreme Court judges, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah, he did.
He called them out, said, "Woe to you, you'll never know what hit you."
Yeah.
So, once again, the hypocrisy is astounding. Schumer can be ignored, but the U.S. president can be usurped by one selected judge.
Yeah.
I think these domestic enemies are the ones that really need to be acted on even before the enemy act.
Mark, that's a great point. Thank you. And let's revisit that clip from Chuck Schumer.
Fundamental rights. I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions.
Okay, great point from Mark there, Bill.
Yeah. That here you have Schumer inciting a mob.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're finding out that the Democrats have rent-a-mob, that you have individuals like Soros and others that are putting up the money to attack the Tesla stations and so forth. But here's Schumer. He was inciting a mob. And, I just Googled it, but it was Chief Justice John Roberts that appointed Jeb Boasberg to the FISA court. This is a very, very powerful court.
Yeah.
And this Boasberg that's standing against Trump was appointed to this important office by Chief Justice John Roberts.
Wow.
It's like, whose side is he on?
Wow. Let's go to Jim next in Wisconsin. Jim, you're on the air.
Hello, Bill. We've met. I really appreciate your ministry. Thank you so much, sir. But
God bless you.
Thank you. I wanted to say that I put action into words that Mr. Schmidt gave about contacting our congressman. I already contacted our congressman here in Wisconsin and let them know about this program. And the information that's in here is very, very useful.
Yeah.
And I hope they do that. I want to ask a question. What these judges are doing, ordering these planes to be turned around with these violent criminals in them, couldn't be considered giving aid and comfort to our enemies?
Well, Bill?
Yeah. I think they could be the ones called up with violating the law and assisting criminals and putting Americans in danger. And so, the tables need to be turned.
Yeah.
Here they are letting people across the border, and that girl was raped at the University of Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at politics, there are groups that want violence, and they want to destabilize. When I wrote my book on socialism, I went through these countries after the World War II, and they were trying to build themselves up again, and the KGB would go in there and cause riots, and then co-opt the media to blame the leader for the riots. And then when the people got upset enough, they would do a coup and take over and make the country a Soviet satellite. And so there's a whole psychology of mob psychology that wants to create violence. And so, unfortunately, this has been the Democrat tactic.
Jim, thank you for the call. We're going to move on to Ron in Tri-Cities, Washington. You're on the air.
Yes, Mr. Federer, I would think that they should go to Article 3, the very second sentence, and that states that judges should hold their office during good behavior. They took an oath to the U.S. Constitution, and if they are not complying with that, then they should be removed from office. There are a lot of judges behaving badly, and if they're not demonstrating good behavior, then they should hang up their black robe and go chase an ambulance.
Okay. Thank you for your comment there, Ron. Tommy?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I personally think that they are doing an overreach. There have been judges impeached in the past for overreaching. And so I think that some people say, well, you need 2/3 of the Senate to impeach, and you're never going to get that. It's like, maybe even if they can't get the votes, they need to feel a little bit of attention on them, and maybe some investigations, and maybe just that alone would deter them from doing these terrible things.
And we've got Tommy calling from Ostrander, Minnesota. Tommy, you're on the air.
Hi. According to one a biography that I read of President Thomas Jefferson, he fired 6 federal judges because they were overreaching. We need to do that some more.
Wow. Bill, can a president fire federal judges?
That's really good. I think I'm going to look that one up. I do know that there's power that, Andrew Jackson, as I mentioned, decided to totally disregard the Supreme Court decision. But that's a good one to look up.
Great. So, thank you for the call.
I'm going to check that out.
And Roger in Marble, Minnesota, you're on the air. Hello, Roger. You're on the air.
Thank you for my call. I tuned in late, but I was trying to ask, how can a judge actually rule on somebody that has been a gangster or a gang member and call him back into or allow him back into the country?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill. We're 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Yeah, it makes no sense. They're doing totally illogical things, and it's up to us, the people, to put pressure on our congressmen to say, look, you have authority. You created these inferior courts. You can uncreate them, and you need to stop these justices and take away their authority.
And you can reach out to your member of Congress at 202-224-3121 and 202-225-3121. Bill, thank you so much for your research and joining us here on the broadcast today.
Thank you, and thank all the listeners for calling in.
And friends, let me just encourage you, within just a couple of hours from now, the contents of this program, the audio file, is going to be uploaded to our website. Would you take that and share it with others? Share the link with others to let them learn what you have learned today about the critical need to rein in judicial activism. God bless you, friends. Thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk, our website, crosstalkamerica.com.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.